If you're curious to learn about mobile development, be it Android or iOS, this is the one video that you should be taking a look at. You learn about a complete roadmap that you can follow so that you can learn Android development or iOS development. I'll be having Facebook software engineer Rahul Pandey talking about Android development as well as iOS development. Make sure that you watch till the end, hit the like button and subscribe, and let's get into this video. Hi Rahul, thank you so much for joining me here for this video. How are you doing there?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great as well. So in this video, we want to talk about Android development, or most generally app development. So tell us a little bit about your journey. Why did you choose app development over web development?
Totally. So I started doing Android app development back when I worked at Pinterest, which is like starting 7 years ago. So it's been a while now. And I think there were two reasons I picked Android. Number one is that at the time, Pinterest was expanding internationally. It was a lot of the people who were using Pinterest back then were in the US or Canada, and those are iPhone dominant countries. But they wanted to expand and get a lot of users internationally. And for that, of course, most countries in the world are going to be Android dominant. And so a very high business priority was, hey, can we make a much better Android app so we can actually attract and retain people on Android? And so that was one big thing. I wanted to have impact. And I think in general, a good philosophy is do the things that are impactful for you and for your company, and you will be rewarded. So that was one big reason. The other big reason was the people. I think that when I landed at Pinterest, there were a couple of really strong senior engineers, and I knew that they would allocate time and help me grow and avoid pitfalls and really guide me to become a good developer, a good Android developer. And I feel like that's another thing that I would recommend is that if you have a choice between two technologies, go to the one where you feel like you'll have more support, where you'll have people who will look out for you, because your learning will be so much faster when you have that support group. The one thing I'll say that not to do is I think that a lot of people, they say that follow your passion. And I think that's generally okay advice. But the thing that some people don't do well is that they'll go for a walk or, they'll go through their day and they'll hope that, okay, where is my passion? They'll kind of hope and pray and wait until their passion finds them. But the reality is that the passion won't find you. You have to go out and do the work, right? And I feel like a much better way of actually figuring out what technology you want to do or want to do web development or app development is find the people who you like and who you want to spend time with and figure out what is the urgent business need for your company and do that. And that's what led me to Android. And I think it's been a really good decision for me.
Awesome. So tell us about what to choose between Android development or iOS development, or is this like a stupid question I'm asking? A lot of people ask these questions. So I just wanted to understand your thought about the same. What should we choose?
It's a reasonable question, but I think that people often spend too much time thinking about this question rather than actually doing the work of learning the technology. And again, I would say like the main thing is focus on the people, focus on what is the need at the time. And that can kind of determine your decision. I would say that both Android and iOS have really interesting work. Android is definitely more accessible in the sense that it's much cheaper to develop and publish an Android app. You don't need a Mac. A MacBook, laptop is actually quite expensive. And I think that on the iOS side, one of the benefits would be that Apple is a more closed ecosystem, right? And so, Apple has a very tight control over the software and hardware, which could be a good or bad thing. But one of the consequences of that is that you don't have fragmentation in the same way that you do on Android. So for example, at Facebook, which is where I am now, there are literally tons of bugs that come up on this random device that only is in like China or in Southeast Asia. And I have no idea, I've never even heard of that device, right? So with iPhone or iOS development, you don't really have that problem.
Got it. If someone wants to get into Android development, what languages and what frameworks are required for them to start getting into this field?
I think a couple things. In terms of learning resources, I think there's a ton of stuff out there. I think Google has a company behind Android, right? And so they have a lot of really good code labs and tutorials on their website. I've taught Android for a couple of years now, and I actually published I published the whole course actually on YouTube. So people are welcome to check that out. I'm happy to answer questions if they have any. And I think one of the things you asked is like frameworks or kind of methodologies of how to do Android. And I have a pretty strong opinion here is that people, again, similar to should I do Android development or iOS or web development? People spend too long thinking about the optimal choice to make in terms of architecture or framework rather than just diving in. And, if you're doing Android for any amount of time, you've probably heard of things like MVVM architecture, MVP architecture, MVI architecture. And people have these debates for hours and hours about what architecture is best. And I really think that if you're starting out with Android, you should not waste time really trying to diagnose which one is better and what one you should do, because you're just going to be reading words. You're not actually going to be understanding. A much better way of doing Android is go in, do the stupidest possible thing you could do for an app, and just build it that way. Do it in a simple way. And then once you realize, hey, there are some pitfalls, there are some downsides to doing it that way, then you can understand and appreciate the value of an architecture like MVVM. But I would say don't really worry about any of the terminology or architecture. Just start with a very basic tutorial, build it out, and then extend it. And then you're going to learn a lot that way.
I feel that from what I have learned from my own peers in college, they think that Android development is somehow more difficult or more challenging than web development.
I don't know if it's more difficult, but I do think that the iteration cycles on Android are potentially longer. And what I mean by that is, you make a change in Android Studio, and then you build and compile your app, and it goes to the emulator. And oftentimes the emulator is like this big clunky software, or maybe you're deploying changes onto your physical Android phone, which is connected to your laptop. But like that, making a small change will typically take 3 or 4 seconds. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to web, where like I go to VS Code or whatever Sublime text you have, and I change the color, and immediately I can see the change updated on my website that I'm developing, or I can change the text and immediately it gets updated. The development cycle is way faster on web, and I think maybe that lends itself to people viewing Android as more difficult.
Right. So there are actually a couple of things that are available for making Android applications. You have Flutter, you have Kotlin, React Native, or you can just use plain old Java. What works best from your perspective? Also, what is the most important concept that one needs to learn when they are building Android applications? Like for example, if someone is building web apps, so in that case, DOM is a really important thing to learn, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you're learning about React, you have to learn about how the React component works, how does it update itself. So just like that, what is the important concept in Android?
Yeah. So for the first question, Kotlin, Flutter, or React Native, or there's actually many other choices you have. The short answer is Kotlin. The longer answer is that it depends. I feel like a lot of people ask me that question. Okay, should I do native development with Kotlin, which is like a well-supported framework, language and technology by Google, or should I do something a little bit more new and cross-platform like React Native and Flutter? And I think if you're really just want to get started, pick Kotlin. Of course, the answer is a little bit more nuanced, and it'll depend on what you exactly want to build. I would say that if your priority is just to build an app on Android and iOS both, then cross-platform is really appealing, because then you don't have to spend the time now to learn Android and iOS. You can just do one code base and you get both apps. But in general, what I would say is that for most of the big companies or medium-sized companies that really care about app quality, app performance, they are going to do native development, which means that they're going to have one code base written in Kotlin or Java for Android, and then one other code base written in Objective-C or Swift for iOS. And so if you really care about highest quality and being employed by companies like Airbnb, Facebook, Microsoft, these other ones, you will have to do native at some point. So I would say, that's why I say that, short answer is start with Kotlin, and then you can explore others, later on. So here's how I think about that. I had this community called Tech Career Growth, which I started with my friend Alex, and he had a really good framework, Alex, which I'll share here. He talks about building technology as Lego pieces. And the idea here is that think about what is a fundamental building block of the application or the experience that you're trying to deliver to people. And that is really what you should spend your time understanding deeply and figuring out how you can really do that quickly. So for example, what I would say on Android, one of the core Legos, one of the core building blocks is going to be how do you display a scrollable list of items, right? Like if you think about pretty much any application out there, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's basically a list of content and you scroll through it. How do you make that look good? How do you make it performant? How do you add images in there? All these different things that are you're guaranteed going to have to do if you implement an app. So with Android, the way you typically do that is with a component called Recycler View. And so for that, I would say that's one of the core things you should really understand. What are the mechanics behind that? What are the pros and cons? How do you optimize it? Things like that. One other core Lego in any app is navigation, right? Pretty much any interesting app is going to have multiple screens, right? So you click a button and maybe you navigate to a screen, you hit the back button, you go back, you might open up a modal, right? So how do you actually navigate between different parts of the application? On Android, we use something called the intent system. And what that means is that I have an intention or I have intent to launch the phone app or the camera app or launch a different fragment or activity. Activity is like a screen on Android. And so to start out with on Android, I'd say those are the two kind of fundamental things that you should be aware of: intents and recycler view, or scrolling lists on Android.
Got it. As a app developer, what is more lucrative, getting a job at these top tech companies or working as an individual contractor or working as an individual freelancer, according to your own experience?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, because my experience is very much California, US driven. That's where I've worked my whole life. It's definitely more lucrative for the vast majority of people to work at a big tech company. And the reason is because if you work at a big tech company, number one, typically your salary will be high. You're going to have equity, which will also be meaningful, right? Like stock in the company. You have some sort of bonus. And almost always that's going to be higher than what you could probably earn in your first 2, 3, 4 years as a freelancer when you don't really have a name. And the other thing is that I think if you work at a company, you also have a career progression plan. And that's critical, I think, for me and for most of my friends, being able to look out 2 or 3 years ahead and say, hey, I can actually get to another level, which will pay significantly more. That's something that I think you're much more on your own for freelance work, because you have to now decide, okay, can I actually land a client who is willing to pay X amount more? And that's I think like the way I think about freelance is it's kind of feast or famine. Like when you're doing really well, you're going to do really well and you're going to get a lot of clients and you can charge them. But there also are going to be periods, I think, where you have to be prepared to not have any clients. And a lot of your work will just be putting out content, writing blogs, making videos to try and attract people to show them that, you know what you're doing and you can charge them the rate. So I think it depends on the market that you're in and, what opportunities you have. But I think for me, usually the big company or the medium-sized company route is more lucrative.
There is a huge movement going out there for no-code applications, right? People are building no-code websites using things like Webflow, Bubble, Editor X, and a bunch of other tools. Are you seeing the same thing happen with apps? And if so, what are some interesting applications that you're looking for that are no-code platform for people to build their own applications on it, or even low-code, for instance?
Yeah, I think that the whole low-code, no-code movement is really powerful, because it basically, rather than having to go to school for 4 years and like go deep in computer science and only then can you build an app, now we're making it much more democratic. Like it doesn't matter. You're a salesperson, you're a marketing person, and now you have the ability to actually make something which is very useful and can drive business impact, right? So I think the implication of that is really powerful. I haven't gone too deep in that because, I'm an engineer, so I have the ability to do like maybe the more advanced thing. But I do think that I've dabbled a little bit. So like one platform that I looked at is called Glide. And the way that is really interesting. So the way it works is that you just basically make a spreadsheet on Google and you put in, here's like the name of the person, the image URL of the person, their hometown, or whatever information you want. And based on that spreadsheet, it'll automatically turn that into a Android or iOS app. And it'll actually use the components of that platform. So that was a really cool one. And I think that I know there's a ton of platforms out there like Bubble or, Webflow, all these other. I haven't looked too much into those, but I think one thing that's exciting is if you've heard of Airtable or Coda. So these are effectively document editors, right? They're not so much like website builders. They're more like a Google Doc. But the thing is, they're Google Docs with special powers. And so I've looked a little bit into those as well. And they're really amazing because you can do things like create tables and filter them and take data from one table in your Airtable document and display it in a different way in another table. And these are things that you can't typically do in a regular Word document or Google Doc. And so you're adding a layer of logic or a layer of smarts on top of a vanilla document. I think that's also incredibly powerful.
Got it. So on social media, what are some people that you look up to, or what are some hackathons that happen that are huge in the Android developer space? And just great sources of learning about the latest that is happening in the Android space, according to you.
Yeah, I would say, okay, two things. One is a YouTube channel that comes to mind is my friend Coding and Flow. His name is Florian. He's a guy from Germany. And I think he makes some of the highest quality Android content out there. Like when I started out, he's been doing it for a while now. When I started making content on YouTube about Android, he was really the person I said, wow, if I could make that level of clarity, that level of information density in my video, I'll be really happy. He puts a lot of effort in. So I think he's a good person that, if people are interested, I'd recommend him. And the other group of people I'd recommend are the developer advocates at Google. And so a lot of people might know developers. I'm sure people generally know, I know an Android developer. But the thing is, a lot of the developers I have found are not very good at explaining things. Like, they're good at coding. And so I think if you look for people who are developer advocates, their whole job is they know the coding, they know the technology, but they're also really good at communicating that, writing it down. Or
is that like a role that they have over there?
Yeah, so Google hires
advocate
for developer advocates. So basically they have a team of Android, which is probably 1,000 engineers who are just working on the actual Android operating system. But they also have, I would say, dozens or maybe hundreds of developer advocates. And their whole job is, let me communicate with the community about the new features that are coming out in Android. What are the pros and cons, when to use what? And I think anytime you see something by a developer advocate, I really try and spend some time looking at it or learning from it, because I know that they've put a lot of thought and effort into the presentation. And not only do they know what they're talking about because they're from Google and they have this engineering background, but they're also really good at communicating it. So I would say that the Android developer YouTube channel is primarily run by developer advocates at Google. And that's another really good resource to check out in addition to Coding and Flow.
I had one last question. That was, as we are having more and more Android applications, most of our time is only spent on, let's say, 10, 15 apps at the most, right? Is there still growth aspect remaining for you to have one app that would get into the top 50 or the top 10 applications that are most downloaded or most looked after, according to you? Some people say that, Android applications, or if you just want to build your own Android app, it's sort of dead in the sense that most of the attention is only in the top a few applications. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the answer is, again, I feel like I keep saying is the answer is depends. I think it depends. So I think if you're trying to build an indie app where you have enough revenue that you're going to be able to live off of it, I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think that, in fact, I think there's more opportunity now than there has ever been, in the sense that I feel like there are a lot of areas of Android and in terms of just the world changing so rapidly, that if you build a really good app, which is designed for a very specific audience, right? It's not like a billion people, but you're talking about maybe 10,000 or 50,000 people who really have that problem, and you build an Android app which is better than all the others. I think that you can charge for it or put ads in, and you can make a lot of money that way. A lot in the sense of you can live off of it. I think that what you're saying, which I think is correct, is that there's a lot of saturation at the top. So for the mega apps, we're talking about Instagram, TikTok, Facebook,
right, billions of users.
That is, I think, very difficult to break into, because the virality of downloading apps is not quite the same as the virality of visiting a website, right? The barrier to entry to going to xyz.com, I could just do that right now. But if you tell me, okay, download XYZ app, I'll think about it. I'll say, no, well, I don't know if I want to waste, 20 seconds of my life going to the Play Store and downloading it, right? So I think that does, create in some ways an artificial ceiling on how big of an app you can do, which is why in general, if your proposition is I want to build the next billion user app, that's actually very, very hard. Especially in the app
Unless
world.
you're TikTok.
Unless you're TikTok. Yeah. And I think that's, 10 years from now, I think that there probably will be at least one or two new entrants in the top 10 apps. I think it just requires you have to really have an insight onto here's how the world is changing and here's how I'm going to capitalize on that change, right? But it's not something that you can just do on the side. It's going to be something that, you work with the team, you get venture capital funding probably, and you have to really be clear about what you're trying to build. So I agree with you that the top apps are really hard to break into.
Let's get into iOS development, right? So how can someone start in iOS development according to you? What softwares to use, what tools to use, and just what do you think about this whole field in iOS development?
Yeah, so I've dabbled in iOS in the same way, similar to no code. I think I have done a little bit of iOS, but I'm certainly not the expert. But I would say that there are a couple things. First off, in terms of equipment, you need a MacBook, which is sometimes a turn off for people. And also, ideally, you would want a actual iPhone device. But neither of those are really cheap. I would say, if you really want to invest in being an iPhone developer, you should have a physical iPhone and, of course, a MacBook. And then in terms of how to get started, I would say Ray Wanderlich is, I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's a pretty popular website, and they do programming tutorials that are really high quality. And I think actually at this point, I think they might even do Android stuff. But I think they started out primarily as an iOS tutorial website, and they have really high quality stuff. And I've gone through a lot of their content. That's what I'd recommend to people. And then I think that depends on how you learn. If you learn through like lectures, then the Stanford CS 193P, which is a you've probably heard of it. It's pretty famous. There's a guy, Paul Hegarty, who is a professor at Stanford, and all the content of 193P, which is an iPhone development course at Stanford, is completely free and available on YouTube. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. It's actually much more in-depth. It's a longer course than the one I taught on the Android side, but that's definitely a really good one. And then I think Apple has some documentation, although I haven't really checked that out, but I'm sure that, the Apple documentation, I'm sure they've thought it through and put a lot of time into that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, bro. Thank you so much for joining us here. What's your day in the life look like when you're working at Facebook or Meta, I should say right now, as an Android developer?
I think it changes quite a bit. Right now, I'm actually, interestingly, on a cross-platform team, meaning that, the team that I work on helps to unlock developer productivity and developer efficiency for both Android and iOS. Like, we're working on technology that applies to both. And so a lot of my time is spent understanding what are the needs of the product teams that we are servicing and figuring out how can I make their life easier. So a lot of meetings, and then obviously, a lot of time spent in on-demand, like on a server, we call it an on-demand server. And a lot of time spent coding, code review, talking with other engineers about how to solve different problems. I also have started going into work recently, which is good, because I hadn't gone to the office for like more than a year. And so going back in and having that lunch and the snacks of the of the Meta or the Facebook office is so good. I love that. And I'll just being able to talk informally with my coworkers, I love that. And it's so much easier to do that compared to hopping on a Zoom. So like I think I've been going into the office much more frequently, meetings, talking to people, getting lunch, all the good stuff.
Amazing, bro. Thank you so much for joining us here. It was great learning from you. All the resource links will be in the description for the audience to check out. And yeah, thanks a lot. We would love to do more of these in the future.
I always love talking with you, Ishan. Thanks for having me.
That was the video. I hope you got to learn something from this. If you're still watching, just write in the comment section, I watched till the end. You can connect with Rahul. All his social handles are linked in the description. Please take a look at that. You can also follow me on Instagram as well as Twitter. And that's all I have for you today. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.